It was a typical Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles, the sun shining brightly overhead and the air filled with the buzzing of cicadas. I had decided to fire up the grill in my backyard, a cherished tradition that provided both sustenance and an opportunity to unwind with friends and family. As the aroma of marinated meats began to waft through the air, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was my little slice of heaven, where I could escape the hustle and bustle of city life, even if just for a few hours. The sounds of sizzling meat were accompanied by laughter from my children as they played nearby. The scene was idyllic, neighbors casually walking their dogs, the distant sound of music from a block party down the street. However, that serene atmosphere would soon be shattered in an unimaginable way. I had just settled into a comfortable chair with a cold drink when I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, peering over her fence with an expression that could only be described as discontent. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, everybody has their off days. But moments later, my peaceful afternoon turned chaotic when I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching. Confused and slightly alarmed, I stood up to see what was happening. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived at my home. They stepped out of their patrol car and approached me with a mix of professionalism and curiosity. "We received a call about excessive smell coming from your property," one officer explained, his brow furrowing slightly as he took in the setup, a perfectly normal backyard barbecue. I couldn't help but feel a wave of disbelief wash over me. Excessive smell? From grilling? I stammered, trying to comprehend how something so benign could lead to this unexpected confrontation. My mind raced with questions. Was it really possible for someone to define the smell of grilled burgers and hot dogs as harassment? And even more absurd, had my neighbor actually called the cops over it? As I stood there before the officers, a mix of embarrassment and indignation washed over me. Little did I know that this incident would unravel layers of tension in our community dynamics and bring to light issues far beyond an innocent weekend pastime. Los Angeles is a city of contrasts, where sun-drenched beaches and bustling urban life coexist with quiet suburban neighborhoods like mine. My home, nestled in a modest residential area, was once a haven of camaraderie and warmth. The streets are lined with palm trees swaying gently in the warm breeze, and the evening sky often transforms into a canvas painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun sets. In this vibrant community, afternoons are typically filled with laughter echoing from backyards as families gather for barbecues, children ride their bikes down the block, and neighbors exchange friendly waves. On weekends, it's common to see folks grilling up their favorite dishes, sharing food and stories, a tradition that binds us together in this sprawling city. However, beneath this picturesque surface lies an undercurrent of tension that occasionally surfaces. In our neighborhood, personalities vary widely. While some residents embrace the spirit of communal living, others seem more reserved or quick to take offense at the slightest disturbance. It's a delicate dance of balancing personal freedom with respect for one another's space. My backyard had always been a sanctuary where I could escape the chaos of daily life. The grill served not only as a cooking tool but as a symbol of family togetherness. As I prepped for my barbecue that day, I felt truly connected to my surroundings. The laughter of my children playing tag nearby blended harmoniously with the sizzling sounds emanating from the grill. For me, this was more than just preparing a meal, it was about creating memories. Yet it was precisely this idyllic setting that became the backdrop for an unexpected confrontation. Mrs. Henderson lived next door, an older woman who rarely participated in neighborhood activities and often kept to herself. I had noticed her watching me from her yard before but had dismissed it as typical curiosity between neighbors. Little did I know her discontent would soon escalate beyond mere observation. As police sirens pierced through the peaceful atmosphere, I couldn't shake off a feeling of disbelief that such an ordinary weekend ritual could attract unwanted attention. It was an unsettling reminder that even in a close-knit community like ours, misunderstandings can quickly spiral out of control, turning what should be joyful moments into sources of conflict and confusion. As the sun continued to shine down, I focused my attention on the grill, where the tantalizing aroma of marinated chicken legs and sizzling vegetables filled the air. The grill was more than just a cooking appliance, it was a centerpiece for family gatherings, a gathering place where stories were shared and laughter flowed freely. With each flip of the meat, I felt a sense of pride, knowing I was creating a meal that would bring everyone together. My children darted around the yard, their laughter mingling with the sound of crackling charcoal. It was moments like these that made all the hard work worthwhile, seeing their faces light up in anticipation as they awaited dinner. I could almost hear their excited chattering about how they would pile their plates high with delicious food and sneak bites when they thought I wasn't looking. As I prepared the feast, I couldn't help but reflect on how grilling had become a cherished tradition in our home. Each weekend, my family would come together, whether it was to celebrate birthdays or simply enjoy the warm weather. The grill had witnessed countless memories: our first barbecue as a family, impromptu gatherings with friends, and even quiet evenings filled with heart-to-heart conversations. It symbolized connection, joy, and the beauty of communal living. However, this particular Saturday felt different. As I flipped the chicken over on the grill, I noticed Mrs. Henderson staring over her fence again, her brow furrowed in disapproval. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that her presence brought. It didn't make sense. I knew many neighbors who loved the smell of grilled food just as much as my family did. Yet there she was, embodying an unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air. Despite her watchful gaze, I continued with my task, determined not to let her negativity ruin what was meant to be a joyful occasion. The sounds of laughter faded into the background as I immersed myself in preparing the meal, seasoning burgers, tossing corn on the cob onto the grill, and pouring cold beverages for everyone to enjoy. It was supposed to be a simple day of grilling, a time for joy and relaxation, but little did I know that this innocent act would soon transform into a source of conflict that would upend my peaceful afternoon and spark an unexpected chain of events. As the smell of grilled chicken wafted through the air, Mrs. Henderson sat in her backyard, her emotions simmering just below the surface. To her, it was not merely a pleasant aroma but an overwhelming invasion of her personal space. She had lived next door for years, and while she didn't mind the occasional barbecue, this felt different. The scent seemed to linger longer, permeating her home and disrupting her peace. Mrs. Henderson had always prided herself on maintaining a quiet and serene environment. She often spent her afternoons tending to her garden or reading on her patio, enjoying the tranquility that came with suburban living. Over time, she had developed a sensitivity to any disturbances: loud music, barking dogs, or, in this case, the persistent smell of grilling. It was as if her sanctuary was being encroached upon without consideration for her comfort. As she watched the narrator's family enjoy their gathering, a mix of envy and irritation bubbled within her. Why should they have all the fun while she felt trapped by their festivities? The laughter and joy from their yard felt like an unwanted reminder of her own loneliness. Instead of feeling connected to the community, she felt increasingly isolated by their revelry. Her thoughts spiraled as she considered the implications of their seemingly harmless activity. Wasn't it unfair for one family's enjoyment to disrupt another's? In her mind, the smell of grilled food transformed into a symbol of disregard for her own space and well-being. As moments passed and the scent intensified, she convinced herself that it wasn't just an innocent barbecue, it was harassment. In a moment of frustration, driven by feelings of powerlessness and resentment, Mrs. Henderson made the decision to call the police. It felt like the only way to reclaim her peace, an act of desperation rather than malice. As she dialed 911, she justified her actions to herself. After all, how could she enjoy her garden or open her windows with such a smell hovering nearby? When officers arrived at the scene, she felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She hadn't anticipated that her complaint would escalate into such a spectacle, but she justified it as standing up for her right to a peaceful home. Little did she know that her actions would not only disrupt the narrator's life but also ignite a conflict that would affect their entire community dynamic. As Mrs. Henderson dialed 911, a mix of anxiety and determination surged through her. She felt an odd sense of empowerment, convinced that taking this action would reclaim her peace. When the operator answered, she tried to articulate her grievances as clearly as possible. "I need to report a disturbance," she explained, her voice steady despite the tension swirling around her thoughts. "My neighbors are grilling, and the smell is unbearable. It's harassment." The operator listened patiently, but Mrs. Henderson couldn't help but feel as though her concerns were being dismissed. She repeated her assertion that the odor was not just an issue of preference but a genuine disruption to her life. As she described the situation, she imagined herself portraying a brave defender of personal space, rather than someone overreacting to a neighbor's barbecue. While waiting for the police to arrive, she paced back and forth on her patio, rehearsing what she would say to the officers when they got there. Would they understand? Would they side with her or embarrass her further? Despite these questions, she clung tightly to the conviction that she was standing up for what was right in her own home. Meanwhile, in the narrator's yard, laughter and the sound of sizzling meat continued without a hint of anticipation for what was about to unfold. The narrator remained blissfully unaware that their innocent gathering had triggered such an extreme response next door. As the police car pulled up on their street, however, confusion began to seep into the joyous atmosphere. The officers stepped out, exchanging glances as they approached the front gate. Their expressions were neutral but curious, reflecting that they had handled their share of neighborhood disputes before. When they knocked on the door and introduced themselves, the narrator's heart raced. "Is there a problem?" they asked, bewildered by the sudden shift from celebration to confrontation. It wasn't long before Mrs. Henderson emerged from her yard to speak with the officers. With fervor, she recounted how intolerable the smell had become and how it disrupted her peaceful existence. The narrator watched in disbelief as Mrs. Henderson painted their family barbecue as a criminal act rather than a simple weekend tradition. The officers listened intently while trying to maintain professionalism in an absurd situation. Inside, I felt a mix of embarrassment and anger as my innocent act of grilling morphed into something much larger, a clash of neighbors grounded in miscommunication and differing perspectives on community living. As the police officers approached the narrator's home, a palpable air of confusion settled over the scene. The narrator stood at the doorway, feeling an unsettling mix of incredulity and vulnerability as they faced the two uniformed figures. One officer, a tall man with a calm demeanor, introduced himself while the other took notes on a small notepad. "Good afternoon," he said. "We received a complaint about some disturbance in the area." "Disturbance?" The narrator echoed, unsure of what else to say, half expecting this was some kind of misunderstanding that could easily be clarified. They stepped outside, attempting to maintain composure amid the unfolding drama. Laughter from children still echoed in the background, sounding oddly out of place against the seriousness of the situation. The officer began explaining that they had received a call from Mrs. Henderson regarding an unbearable smell emanating from their yard. It took effort for the narrator to stifle an incredulous laugh at how absurd it all seemed, grilling considered a disturbance. The officer's expression remained neutral as he noted down the details. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson stood by, arms crossed defensively as she watched the interaction unfold. Feeling emboldened by her earlier actions, she chimed in with fervor, reiterating her grievances and emphasizing how disruptive she found it all. "I'm just trying to enjoy my garden in peace," she insisted, her voice raised slightly. In this moment, as tensions escalated among neighbors and law enforcement alike, the narrator felt caught in a surreal tug-of-war between two conflicting realities: their right to grill and enjoy family time versus Mrs. Henderson's insistence on her right to an untroubled home life. The officers turned back to the narrator, seeking clarification on whether they could adjust their grilling methods or perhaps tone it down for future weekends. "What we need is for both sides to come together," one officer stated diplomatically while glancing at Mrs. Henderson. The suggestion hung in the air like an unspoken opportunity for reconciliation. Yet, beneath that surface conversation was an undercurrent of disbelief that something as simple as grilling could lead to such heated discord within a community. As laughter faded into an uneasy silence and tension filled every corner of both yards, it became clear that this was no ordinary neighborhood dispute. It was a confrontation that blurred boundaries and illuminated deep-seated frustrations hidden within seemingly friendly facades. Treading carefully was essential now more than ever, as misunderstandings threatened to define relationships moving forward in this once peaceful neighborhood. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted dramatically in the wake of the police visit. Word of the incident began to spread among residents, and opinions quickly diverged. Some neighbors expressed support for the narrator, believing that grilling was a common and cherished tradition that should be celebrated rather than condemned. "It's just a barbecue," one neighbor remarked, shaking her head as she tended to her own garden. "We all have our outdoor activities, it's part of living in a community." However, the reactions were far from uniform. Others echoed Mrs. Henderson's sentiments, arguing that everyone should be considerate of their neighbor's peace. "I can see where she's coming from," a middle-aged man commented while walking his dog past Mrs. Henderson's yard, nodding in agreement with her stance. "Not everyone enjoys the smell of smoke wafting into their homes." His comments demonstrated how easily divisions could form within a seemingly close-knit community. As tensions simmered, some residents took it upon themselves to discuss the issue more openly. Neighborhood groups began convening to address what they perceived as a growing problem of noise and odors from backyards. Flyers circulated around the neighborhood advertising meetings focused on community standards and respectful living practices. Despite the intention behind these gatherings, they only fueled further divides among residents. Meanwhile, the narrator was left feeling isolated and misunderstood. Friends and family members who had previously indulged in weekend barbecues with them started to hesitate about visiting, uncertain of how their presence might be perceived or if they would unintentionally add to the friction with Mrs. Henderson. This sense of alienation deepened as they overheard whispers and speculations about the grilling incident during casual exchanges at the mailbox or on evening strolls. The ongoing discourse transformed simple outdoor gatherings into events fraught with anxiety and apprehension, as people became increasingly cautious about how their actions might be interpreted by others. What once was a source of joy, a spirited backyard barbecue, had morphed into a symbol of discord within the community. In local social media groups, posts about the incident sparked heated debates, polarizing opinions and further escalating the situation. Both sides exchanged passionate arguments, highlighting not only personal grievances but also broader themes surrounding neighborly expectations and shared living spaces in urban environments like Los Angeles. As the community navigated this unexpected upheaval, it became clear that this single incident would have lasting repercussions, affecting relationships and perceptions long after the smoke from the grill had cleared. The sense of camaraderie that once defined their neighborhood had begun to fray, replaced by uncertainty and unease. In the midst of rising tensions following the police visit, the narrator began to wonder about the legal implications of their grilling activities. Living in Los Angeles, they believed they had a right to enjoy their backyard to its fullest extent, but suddenly felt uncertain about where that right began and ended. The concept of personal freedom versus communal living suddenly weighed heavily on their mind. The local laws regarding noise, odor, and disturbances were complex and often subject to interpretation. The city had ordinances aimed at maintaining peace in residential areas, but where did grilling fit into that framework? The narrator found themselves pondering whether an occasional barbecue could truly be considered harassment, as Mrs. Henderson had claimed. Seeking clarity, they spoke with a few neighbors who had been through similar experiences in the past. Some had encountered complaints about loud music or late-night parties but had never experienced a situation involving the smell from a grill. Just remember, one neighbor advised, everyone has different tolerances, and it's about finding some common ground. This advice resonated but did little to assuage their confusion over how such simple family enjoyment had escalated into a heated dispute. The more the narrator investigated local laws, the more they encountered varying viewpoints on what constituted acceptable behavior in shared living spaces. They read about noise ordinances and nuisances, yet there seemed to be little specific guidance on grilling smells. This lack of clarity left them feeling unanchored, unsure if they should continue grilling or be prepared to compromise for their neighbors' sake. During neighborhood meetings convened in response to the ongoing issues, participants debated these very matters. Residents discussed community guidelines regarding outdoor cooking and other activities that might cause disturbances. The mixed opinions revealed deep-seated feelings. Some advocated for stricter regulations against odors and sounds, while others were staunch defenders of casual outdoor gatherings and traditional practices like barbecuing. As participants spoke passionately, some in support of increased limitations and others urging the need for more relaxed approaches, the narrator listened intently, reflecting on how this conflict was more than just about smells from grilling. It was emblematic of larger themes related to urban living, rights versus responsibilities, personal space versus community involvement, and how easily misunderstandings can arise amid everyday joys. The stirring conversations served as a stark reminder that laws alone might not solve interpersonal conflicts. Bridging perspectives and fostering understanding among neighbors would ultimately prove essential in rebuilding a sense of community, a task that now felt daunting in light of recent events but was necessary for turning a page toward resolution and harmony. As the weeks passed following the incident, the impact on relationships within the neighborhood became increasingly evident. The narrator found themselves in an uncomfortable position, feeling both isolated and scrutinized by neighbors who had previously been friendly. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained and filled with unspoken tension. casual chats over the fence were replaced by awkward silences, and even friendly waves became hesitant gestures. Mrs. Henderson, emboldened by her actions, seemed to adopt a more confrontational stance within the community. She began to engage in discussions about neighborhood guidelines with a newfound fervor, often promoting stricter regulations concerning noise and odors during neighborhood meetings. This shift alienated some residents who felt she was overstepping her bounds and infringing upon others' rights to enjoy their homes, yet they were hesitant to voice their dissent openly due to fear of being targeted next. The narrator's friends also began to hesitate about visiting. Once regular attendees at barbecue gatherings, they now worried about potential backlash from Mrs. Henderson or other nearby residents. Invitations were met with cautious responses. Friends would express enthusiasm but then backtrack, unsure if it was wise to partake in what had become a symbol of conflict rather than joy. Among those who did come by, conversations shifted from lighthearted topics to discussions about community harmony and boundaries. "I just don't want to get caught up in any drama," one friend admitted during a visit, highlighting how the atmosphere surrounding the narrator had shifted from welcoming to contentious. It was disheartening for the narrator to see something as simple as grilling divide not just their family but also friendships that had once flourished in this tight-knit community. The ongoing debates about grilling and disturbances also led to larger conversations beyond the immediate neighborhood. Local social media groups buzzed with opinions and speculation about the narrator's situation, creating a sense of public scrutiny that added another layer of pressure. Some residents rallied behind the narrator's right to grill freely, others sided with Mrs. Henderson's call for peace and quietness. This online discourse often felt more divisive than constructive, with comments escalating into heated exchanges. Ultimately, this conflict served as a catalyst for deeper reflection within the community about personal rights versus collective responsibilities and how easily misunderstandings can fracture relationships that once felt solid. For the narrator, it became clear that rebuilding connections would require patience and open dialogue, an effort that felt daunting given how quickly things had changed but was essential for restoring a sense of belonging in their neighborhood. Navigating this complex web of social dynamics proved challenging, yet it also offered an opportunity for growth and understanding among residents who needed to learn how to coexist peacefully amidst differing expectations and lifestyles. The conflict sparked by the neighbor's complaint about grilling served as a microcosm for broader societal issues that extend beyond the confines of the neighborhood. It illuminated the delicate balance between personal freedom and communal responsibility, a theme that resonates in many urban environments. As communities grow denser and more diverse, the challenge of cohabitation presents itself in increasingly complex ways. In this incident, the clash of perspectives showcased how easily misunderstandings can escalate into significant disputes. Residents found themselves grappling with questions about what it means to live in a shared space. Is it acceptable for one person's enjoyment to infringe on another's tranquility? As discussions evolved, these questions became not just about grilling but about the essence of community living itself. The ripple effects of the incident reached beyond personal relationships to touch on larger cultural themes. The grilling dispute highlighted generational divides in how people perceive shared living spaces. Older residents, like Mrs. Henderson, often emphasized traditional values of peace and quiet, while younger families tended to prioritize open expression and communal activities. This divergence in values mirrored broader societal trends, where differing expectations clash in a rapidly changing world. Moreover, the incident sparked conversations about neighborly relations that went viral on social media. Online forums filled with heated debates reflected an array of viewpoints, revealing how digital platforms could amplify local conflicts and encourage polarization. Some residents rallied behind the narrator, advocating for their right to enjoy backyard barbecues, while others felt justified in supporting Mrs. Henderson's desire for peace. The characterizations became exaggerated. Grillers were seen as disruptive party animals, while those seeking quiet were viewed as overly uptight. The increasing scrutiny from fellow residents highlighted an important issue: public perception can shape private lives in profound ways. The narrator discovered that even a simple act of grilling could become fodder for gossip and speculation within the community, leading to a sense of paranoia that none of their interactions were safe from judgment. Ultimately, this incident forced all involved to confront uncomfortable truths about living in proximity to others. It became a call for dialogue about not just practical guidelines for behavior, but deeper discussions on empathy, respect, and understanding in a multicultural society. The narrator realized that moving forward would require more than just adhering to laws or neighborhood standards. It would necessitate an ongoing commitment to fostering relationships grounded in mutual respect and consideration. As the community continued to navigate the aftermath of the grilling incident, it was evident that this experience could either serve as a divisive moment or an opportunity for growth, an essential chance to redefine what it meant to coexist harmoniously amidst differing lifestyles and expectations. As time progressed, the narrator recognized that the discord incited by the grilling incident could serve as a pivotal moment for the community. Determined to restore harmony, they took the initiative to organize a neighborhood gathering aimed at fostering open dialogue among residents. Inviting Mrs. Henderson and others who felt affected or involved, the gathering was framed not merely as an opportunity to address grievances but as a chance to rebuild connections and forge understanding. On the day of the meeting, residents gathered in a local park, some arriving with dishes to share, while others carried chairs or blankets. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension as neighbors exchanged tentative greetings. The narrator was grateful to see various faces, those who had once rallied around their barbecues and others who had been critical. As the discussion began, the narrator expressed their thoughts candidly, sharing how unexpected and bewildering the police intervention had been for them. They emphasized that grilling represented cherished family traditions, not an intent to disturb anyone's peace. Mrs. Henderson then addressed the group, explaining her perspective of feeling overwhelmed in her own space and how the situation had escalated out of fear rather than malice. What unfolded was a heartfelt exchange where neighbors shared their experiences and concerns regarding noise and disturbances, leading to deeper insights into each other's lifestyles. Many acknowledged that shifting social dynamics, the growing number of younger families wanting to celebrate life outdoors, could clash with traditional expectations of tranquility valued by longer-term residents. Through this dialogue, the narrator and neighbors began collaborating on developing informal guidelines that would help balance personal freedoms with communal respect. Suggestions ranged from establishing quiet hours for loud activities to designated days for neighborhood gatherings like barbecues or block parties, efforts aimed at promoting coexistence rather than division. In this process, relationships began to heal. The narrator noticed familiar faces appearing at their back door again, each bringing good food and laughter back into the mix, signaling a return to those joyful gatherings they once took for granted. Even Mrs. Henderson, initially apprehensive about engaging further, showed signs of softening as she participated in community discussions with newfound respect for differing perspectives. Ultimately, this incident evolved from a painful misunderstanding into a catalyst for growth and connection within the community. Neighbors found themselves looking beyond mere grievances towards collective living experiences that honored both personal joys and shared responsibilities. The resolution came not from legal ordinances or public disputes but from humanizing each other's experiences. What emerged was not just a temporary truce but a renewed commitment to nurturing community ties built on empathy and mutual respect. The narrator learned that while challenges may arise in close quarters, they can also pave the way for understanding and togetherness when approached with an open heart and a willingness to listen.